Let's play a game. You're an offensive coaching assistant for the Giants underneath Pat Shurmur, and to start the season, you have to find a way to beat arguably the fastest, nastiest, and cockiest defense in the NFL, which was built in part by a legendary name from your own franchise. The tools at your disposal are an aging but still well above average quarterback, an incredibly talented all-pro caliber wide receiver, a very underappreciated do-it-all slot receiver, a freakishly athletic young tight end, and one of the most sensationally gifted running backs to enter the league in many years. To say that this is the most star-studded clash between offensive and defensive talent of the season is probably a big understatement. Kickoff is just over a month away, and between now and then, you, as Shurmur's assistant, have just one goal and one goal only. Find a crack in Jacksonville's armor and pull off the upset. Your clock starts now. Go. Everybody is talented in the NFL. Some are a lot more talented than others, of course, but in general, you are probably not going to make a 53-man roster unless you are one of the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1%. That lack of a gap in overall talent is why there is so much parity year after year across the league, and why, regardless of how many freaks of nature you accumulate on your team, the only thing that really matters is having a coach that knows how to use them. If your staff can't game plan, can't adjust, and can't figure out how to properly use all of the 1%ers on their rosters, well, that's how good teams on paper end up being not so good on the field. This week, I'm going to show you how good coaching staffs put together good game plans by building my own mock game plan for the Giants offense against the extremely fast and physical Jaguars defense. To do that, I did what real coaches do every week, day after day, hour after hour. Grind tape. In particular, I looked at tape of every single third down snap for this Jags defense across 5 very different games, against 5 very different systems, and 5 very different quarterbacks. Because after all, beating the Jags on third down is easily the most important piece of the puzzle for this entire game plan to work. So any time spent creating a game plan against them should start on third down. Jacksonville was 4th in the NFL last year in terms of third down defense, conceding a first down on only 33.6% of all 220 third down attempts. After they acquired Marcel Darius from the Bills, however, their third down defense got even better at just 30.6% across 124 total attempts. That would have been good for 2nd in the league, only behind the Vikings. For this study, I only looked at games from after that Darius trade, since his addition really changed the overall effectiveness of the unit in a big way. The 5 contests I charted were against the Bengals, Browns, Chargers, 49ers, and of course the playoff game against the Steelers. As I said before, I wanted to get a good mix of tape from all over the spectrum in this study, from terrible quarterbacks to great quarterbacks, from below average skill position talent to elite skill position talent, and from really bad play callers to really good play callers. I wanted that mix in there because I needed a baseline to see if the Jaguars' tendencies changed based on any of those different factors, and not surprisingly, no, they really didn't change much at all. Not that they really had to change much because they were pretty damn good no matter what, but still, establishing that consistency in data collection was very important for the sake of creating this game plan. Once I charted the distance, field position, score, personnel grouping, formation, defensive call, offensive call, play result, and my notes on each individual play in my master spreadsheet, I began to parse all of that data into different categories. And once that was done, I could see exactly what the Jaguars defensive coordinator, Todd Wash, would call based on any or all of those factors. Very clear patterns began to emerge almost immediately, patterns that I, as a theoretical Giants offensive coach, could exploit if those tendencies held true in week 1. So, based on all of that tape study and all of that data, here are the keys to surviving and beating that intimidating Jacksonville defense. Number 1, stay on schedule with short, quick passes and tough running between the tackles. The Jaguars may have only given up first downs on 30% of their third down snaps, but when those snaps were on third and short or third and medium, their efficiency dropped like a rock to 53% and 44% respectively. When you let them force you behind schedule into third and long situations, or even worse, third and very long situations, their efficiency skyrocketed back up to 27% and then 11% respectively. That is a big drop off, especially from third and medium to third and long. So the key to a higher efficiency against Jacksonville is to just have as few third and long situations as possible, because that is where the Jags defense is at their best. When you look at the 49ers game, for example, they had probably the best third down performance against the Jags all year, converting a whopping 67% of their 15 attempts. However, only 5 of those 15 attempts were from a distance of 7 yards or more, and none of them were over 10 yards, so they had 0 third and very long situations. They only ran for 3.7 yards per carry, which is below average, and Jimmy Garoppolo only had 7.7 yards per attempt in that quick rhythm passing game, which again isn't that great, but they never allowed themselves to lose yardage on those early downs. They were always going forward, even if only a little bit, which added up to create more third and short and third and medium opportunities, rather than taking a sack or an incompletion on a deep ball or a big loss on the ground to set up third and long. Contrast that with the Chargers, who had a veteran Pro Bowl caliber quarterback and undisputedly better skill position talent than San Francisco, but out of their 15 third down attempts, the exact same number as the Niners, they had 8 situations that were third and long or third and very long. That's over half of their third down attempts that were playing right into Jacksonville's wheelhouse. You cannot, under any circumstances, allow yourself to get behind the chains against this defense, because what makes them special is that if you give them even an inch, they will take a mile from you before you even know what happened. The 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo under center were efficient, they were methodical, and they understood that the only way to wear down this defense was getting them back on their heels with repeated and continuous body blows in the short passing game and the running game. It wasn't sexy, and he wasn't launching deep bombs against this secondary all game long, but it's pretty damn hard to argue with 44 points and a win. That's the model that Pat Shurmur needs to follow first and foremost. Body blow, body blow, body blow, and eventually the knockout will just take care of itself. Secondly, in order to actually move the ball and keep sustaining drives on these more manageable third down opportunities, you have to understand a few key tells and key habits with this defense when you're calling plays. For starters, if you see the free safety Tayshaun Gibson down in coverage on the tight end, it's almost guaranteed to be cover 1, meaning a single high safety with man coverage across the board. On short yardage snaps, the Jaguars called some variation of cover 1 47% of the time, which is a big percentage, and on third and medium it was still a fairly hefty 33%. On third and long, that dropped down to just 23% in favor of more zone coverage instead, and on third and very long, they didn't call any cover 1 at all. So, if you're staying on schedule on early downs and you set up a manageable third down opportunity, expect the Jaguars to play cover 1, and you can use Tayshaun Gibson's alignment as your tell to identify that coverage being used. On all of the snaps that the Jaguars played cover 1 across all distances, Gibson was lined up in man coverage on the tight end on nearly 80% of them because they trust him a lot more in man coverage than they do Barry Church, and for good reason. So on all of those cover 1 calls, they basically have their free safety and strong safety switch roles entirely, which again is a massive tip-off to what the coverage is. And if you know ahead of time that either cover 1 pressure or cover 1 hole are being called, that means you can call plays that specifically attack those defensive alignments. For instance, look at this 3rd and 7 from early in that 49ers game. It's still technically third and long, yes, but 7 yards is still a relatively manageable distance, all things considered. The Jags are showing pressure here, but with Tayshaun Gibson capping on the tight end, George Kittle, Garoppolo knows that there's pretty much a 100% chance that this is man cover 1. The only thing he doesn't know just yet is that with all this man coverage, if the Jags are actually bringing a blitz along with it, or if they're just bluffing. Jacksonville brought blitzes on only 4 snaps in which they were in cover 1 across all the games that I charted. However, 3 of those 4 pressures from cover 1 came in 3rd and 7 or longer situations. So clearly when the distance is longer, they're more willing to be a bit more aggressive with their pressure. Taking all of that information into account, Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan know exactly what play to dial up because they know with pretty good certainty what Jacksonville is going to do. Garoppolo keeps 6 men in to protect against 6 rushers, and he's got Marquise Goodwin running an over route against Jalen Ramsey off the short motion. Now, an over route is a pretty good man coverage killer as is, but off a short motion into a stack, which forces the corner to play off coverage and from slightly outside leverage, this is almost impossible to cover in man-to-man, even for an elite all-pro corner like Jalen Ramsey. Once Goodwin crosses his face, which was inevitable from that leverage and alignment, it was over. All Jimmy had to do was just put the ball out in front of Goodwin in stride where only he could get it, and he did, and that gave them a 24-yard gain on 3rd and long. This is what game planning looks like. The 49ers knew every tendency of the Jaguars' play calling on 3rd down, and they used it against them. They got tipped off for the man coverage by Gibson's alignment. They knew that because of the 7-yard distance, there was a high percentage chance that pressure was coming, so they kept Carlos Hyde in to protect. And most importantly, they knew that in man coverage, even all pros are vulnerable to certain route concepts, and they were not afraid to attack that vulnerability. Now, maybe what's even more prevalent than that man coverage tendency with Gibson is Jacksonville's tendency to employ what's called combo coverages. That brings us to the next point of emphasis in our game plan: understand their comfort zone and do everything you can to make it uncomfortable. Combo coverages are, as you might expect, a combination between man and zone coverage. They call a lot of zone in this defense, it's their bread and butter after all, but what people don't realize is that a significant number of those zone calls tend to turn into combo coverages instead, just by the very nature of how the Jaguars play in this system around the strength of their personnel. And here's what I mean by that. Typically, if the offense isolates one receiver on one half of the field, or maybe splits one receiver way far away from the rest of their eligible receivers, that one isolated receiver will instead be covered man-to-man while the rest of the defense plays zone. On this play, for example, the Z receiver, Josh Malone, is isolated man-to-man on the backside with AJ Bouye. However, we can also see that Tayshaun Gibson is deep and not up near the line of scrimmage, which, as we know statistically, means that it's likely a zone coverage. So when Bouye is 2 to 3 yards off of Malone in man, it doesn't mean that everybody is playing man along with him, it just means that Bouye is playing man coverage within the zone coverage call, hence the term combo coverage. So you might be asking, why are they doing this? Why is Bouye isolated in man within this zone call? And to answer that, think about the vulnerabilities of a basic cover 3 zone defense if Bouye was also in zone, meaning 3 deep zone defenders. One of the best ways to attack that coverage is in the seams between the corners and the free safety. That's Gibson. If Gibson is getting pulled into this number 2 seam by Malone on the backside, and Jalen Ramsey is getting pushed to the boundary on the front side by a go route, that in turn widens the number 1 seam for the slot receiver, Alex Erickson. All Andy Dalton has to do, theoretically, is just move Gibson out of the way with his eyes to the backside, and that seam route is his for the taking. Conversely, if Gibson is getting pulled to that number 1 seam by Erickson, and Dalton is helping him along to get there with his eyes, that leaves Bouye vulnerable on the backside to get hit in that number 2 seam if he's playing in pure zone coverage. Because in pure zone coverage, as you know, corners are expected to be playing with outside leverage so they can keep their eyes on the QB and the receiver at the same time. If you're playing outside leverage while the receiver stems inside to the seam, guess what? You're screwed. You cannot get back inside fast enough to stop that route, assuming that it's thrown to the right spot. That's why seam routes are so effective against cover 3, because of that built-in leverage advantage. The only way to stop a double seam concept against cover 3 is if your free safety has superhuman speed and instincts to shut down both seams at once, and there's maybe 3 or 4 of those guys in the entire league. None of them are Tayshaun Gibson, by the way. So the reason they play Bouye in man coverage on the backside of a cover 3 zone is so that Gibson can just focus on staying over the top of that number 1 seam if Erickson carries his route upfield. And that receiver on the backside won't be a problem because Bouye will be with him every step of the way with no expectations of help. It lowers the burden on the free safety to be perfect in their role and instead shifts that burden to the outside corners. And to me, just looking at the strength of this Jaguars defense, where they have 2 legitimate all-pro caliber corners playing outside, it makes a lot of sense to play tons of combo coverage because I would rather trust those 2 guys to do their jobs than Gibson to do his. And that's not a knock on Gibson at all, he's a fine safety in his own right, but if I'm Todd Wash and I've got 2 all-pro man cover corners, you're damn right that I'm going to use them in man whenever possible, even when the play call is zone. Out of the 68 third down opportunities that I charted across 5 games, the Jags called zone coverages on 44 of them. That's 65% of the time. Out of those 44 zone coverage calls, 20 of them were combo coverages. That means nearly half of all the Jaguars' zone coverages, 45%, still had a man coverage element within them. When you've got corners like they do, that does not surprise me one bit, and I would do the exact same thing. But that 45% combo coverage number is large enough to be an exploitable tendency. That's their comfort zone. We know it's their comfort zone, and as an offensive staff, it's on us to make that uncomfortable. No matter how good your personnel is on defense, and no matter how much you trust them, if the offense knows what you're gonna do, eventually they're gonna scheme a way to attack you and defeat you. That's just how the NFL works. Let's go back to that Niners game for an example, because Jacksonville truly were out-schemed by Kyle Shanahan despite having vastly superior talent on paper. This is a 3rd and 4 late in the first quarter. Gibson is deep again, which as we know is a zone indicator for this defense, and when Garoppolo brings George Kittle across the formation on a motion check, nobody shadows him, which again is another zone indicator, and even as Kittle is motioning, Garoppolo gives a hard count to bait Barry Church into dropping into his shell, which yet again is a 3rd zone indicator. At this point, the Jaguars might as well be screaming at the top of their lungs, "We are in cover 4, what are you gonna do about it?" But it's not entirely cover 4. Kendrick Bourne is isolated on that backside with Jalen Ramsey, and Garoppolo knows that he's isolated backside. He knows that even if everything in front of him is telling him it's cover 4, and it is, not everybody is playing cover 4. That particular matchup right there is man-to-man, and that's the matchup he wants to attack. He trusts Bourne on 3rd down to knock Ramsey's hands away during the release, win across his face on the slant, and secure a catch in a very tight window to move the chains. And of course, he does exactly that. It doesn't matter that Kendrick Bourne is a rookie undrafted free agent from the Big Sky Conference. It doesn't matter that Jalen Ramsey is arguably the best corner in the NFL. The talent difference in this league is not that big. Anyone can beat anyone when they're all part of the same top 1%. The only thing that truly matters in the grand scheme of things is that you know what the defense is running, that you know how to scheme a way to attack it, and that you have the balls to actually execute that scheme. And that brings us to the final and one of the most important aspects of this whole game plan. Give your playmakers a chance and trust them to win. If I'm the Giants, I don't care that they have Jalen Ramsey on the boundary. I've got Odell Beckham. I don't care that they have Tayshaun Gibson. I have Evan Ingram. And I don't care that they have Telvin Smith and AJ Boye. I've got Saquon Barkley and Sterling Shepard. Going into this season, the Giants are one of the few teams that can line up their skill position players against the Jacksonville defense and say, anything you can do, I can do faster. Beckham, Shepard, Ingram, Barkley, I mean, you're going 4 deep here, and pound for pound, they are just as good as every guy that the Jags are lining up with. The only limitation on how many yards and how many points the Giants can put up on this defense is just the effectiveness of the game plan. It's knowing how to stay ahead of the chain so you can avoid the Jaguars' comfort zone and long yardage. It's knowing how to identify their obvious tells in alignment so you can predict what coverages they're running, and knowing what route concepts to call to attack those coverages once you identify them. And to be honest, that would hold true whether New York was playing against the best defense in the league or the worst. No matter who they are facing, the biggest factor in the results on the field is always the game plan. We've got a month to go until kickoff. That's how long Pat Shurmur has to come to the exact same conclusion that I reached today, that regardless of how little or how much faith everyone has in his roster, this team will only go as far as his game plans take them. They can beat the Jaguars, start the season off on the right foot, and contend for the playoffs, or they can fall apart and have another top 5 draft pick in a wasted year. It's all up to him. So if any actual Giants coaches or players end up watching this, you have 1 month to figure out your plan for Jacksonville. You have 1 month to study their tendencies and turn them upside down. And most importantly of all, you have 1 month to decide just how good a team you want to be this season. That clock is now ticking, and it's not stopping for the next 38 days. Go. Thank you so much for watching this week's show. I know it's been almost a month myself since I've released a proper Film Room episode, but I promise it's because I've got a ton of content in the pipeline that's going to be released throughout August leading up to the start of the season. A lot of it's fantasy related, but it's got a ton of film study to go along with it, so hopefully you guys still learn a lot about techniques and matchups and X's and O's as we apply them to a fantasy mindset. You can, of course, still get access to my initial rankings, PPR rankings that is, for this season over on my Patreon page. I'll have my quarterback and tight end rankings videos coming out on this channel sometime next week as well, and then I'll be updating my fantasy rankings documents on the Patreon shortly after that. Any amount of money gets you access, even as little as $1. You can pay whatever you want, really, and that will give you both the initial rankings and all of the updates that come with them through training camp and preseason and all that. And you'll also get access to some patron-only Q&A sessions that I'll be doing every single month from here on out. During the season, I'll also have weekly game picks on Patreon as well for patrons only, so we've got a lot of stuff in store here. I might even do a Survivor League for all the followers of this channel as well, so if you guys have any questions for the best place to host that, let me know in the comments. But yeah, anyway, I got a lot of stuff coming your way on the channel and on Patreon, and we are, well, I guess we're balls to the wall from here on out until February, so buckle up, kids. Until then, later.